Hi, we continue with our chapter Salient Features of our Indian Constitution. In this session, what we will do is we will continue looking at other key aspects and elements of the fundamental rights. Move on to the next two important features of our Indian Constitution, that is fundamental duties and directive principles of state policy. So come, let's start. Earlier, in the group of fundamental rights, we had one more fundamental right to property, which empowered the citizens to purchase, hold or give up and dispose of movable, immovable property. But later, it was deleted from the list of fundamental rights by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Now, why did they do so? There is something called as capitalist ideology, which means money is concentrated only in the hands of a few, and socialist ideology, which calls for equal distribution of wealth, equal distribution of power in the hands of the people. Now, keeping in mind the socialist philosophy of the Constitution, later on it was felt that right to property has to be deleted. Let us move on to another key aspect of our fundamental rights. Now, fundamental rights are given so that we can have all-round development of personality, and we have right to constitutional remedies that have been provided, and through writs we can fight and we can see that if at all our rights are being violated, we can ask for protection of those rights. Now, just like there is a provision made out there, there is also provision made by the constitutional framers to keep a check on the arbitrary actions of the state. Now, what does this mean out here? There are certain restrictions and limitations that are put across. If at all the Parliament sits and makes any law that violates the spirit of the Constitution, then it can immediately be declared as null and void. Now, null and void is a term which means that law is totally cancelled. Now, this entire process is called as judicial review. So, it is the power given to the court to declare any law made by the Parliament or state legislature as null and void if it violates the spirit of the Constitution. Of course, exceptions will be there in case it involves the security of the state, public order or public morality, but there is a check kept on the actions of the parliamentarians. Let us move on to the next key feature, and that is restrictions imposed. Now, although fundamental rights are given to the citizens, but fundamental rights are not absolute. Reasonable restrictions can be imposed on them for the general welfare of the society. So, what can happen? Fundamental rights can be suspended during an emergency. So, in case there is a war, external aggression, some kind of armed rebellion, then temporarily the fundamental rights can be suspended, and as soon as the emergency is over, the rights are restored. So this is one restriction that is there. Next, we are saying for the security of the state, reasonable restrictions can be imposed by the state on the fundamental rights. So the Parliament has a right to modify the fundamental rights of members of armed forces, police force, any kind of intelligence organization to ensure that they properly discharge their duties. Now, dear, what do I mean by reasonable restrictions? Let's go back to our 6 basic freedoms granted in Article 19. Okay, so when I say freedom of speech and expression, doesn't mean I have the right to say anything and everything. Okay, this freedom of speech is not absolute. It can be stopped if it affects any kind of security of the state, or if it hurts the friendly relations with the state, it causes any kind of disrespect of the court or contempt of the court, or the words that I say, the speech that I say is promoting hatred, there is indecency, then obviously I will lose the right of freedom of speech and expression. When I come to freedom of assembling peacefully, the state can curtail if it is my right, if it is affecting the sovereignty, integrity, public order. So if I assemble with a large group, okay, to carry out any criminal activity, or I am obstructing the legal process, then the police will ask me to disperse. Similarly, when it comes to freedom of forming associations and unions, I can have associations and unions to discuss genuine issues, but if it is affecting the safety, sovereignty, integrity of the country, once again, that there will be limits on that. Freedom of movement, I have the freedom to move around in the territory of India, but once again, keeping the national interests in mind, restrictions can be imposed. Freedom to move and reside, settle. Now I cannot just go and settle anywhere. Yeah, there are certain limits to that. For example, I cannot say, Arey, I want to go and settle near the line of control. I am going to take my tent and settle down there. No, I cannot displace the tribals and settle down in their territory. Similarly, freedom of occupation, trade, profession. So the state can put reasonable restrictions, like they can demand for basic technical professional qualification when I am getting in for a job opportunity or I am getting into a particular profession. So reasonable restrictions are imposed on fundamental rights. And then, as we discussed, there are some laws which do restrict the use of rights, once again for public interest, like we saw the preventive detention. So there is Preventive Detention Act, there is something called as Maintenance of Internal Security Act, Defense of India rules. Now all these different acts are provided to maintain, to safeguard the interests of the nations, but yes, they do curtail the use of the fundamental rights. We look at the next element, that is suspension of fundamental rights. As I said, when an emergency is proclaimed, fundamental rights are temporarily suspended. Now, who proclaims this emergency? This emergency is proclaimed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Now, out here, the moment emergency is declared, then the Parliament or the legislature can make any law. The executive has the liberty to take any action, though it might restrict the right to freedom of speech, expression, assembly, association, when the emergency is in operation. Similarly, the President can declare that the right to move to the court for the enforcement of fundamental rights shall remain suspended. That means we will not be able to issue and use writs to demand for the enforcement of our fundamental rights. Let us move on to the next element or the next basic feature of our constitution, and that is the fundamental duties. When we demand for our rights, we also have to remember to perform our duties. So duties and rights go hand in hand. There cannot be a society where there are no rights, and there cannot be a society where we refuse to perform our duties. The fundamental duties were added to the Constitution by the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976. Now you will have to remember this Amendment Act is very important. So by this 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, fundamental duties were inserted in Part 4 of the Constitution. Article 51A of the Constitution contains 10 fundamental duties of a citizen. Later on, The 11th duty was added by the 86th Amendment Act in 2002. So when we are looking at fundamental duties, let us see what my ex-student Shubh had to say. He said, tick tock, do your duties, never stop, keep performing them round the clock. My ex-student Ishika had to say, fundamental duties are the moral obligations to be undertaken by all the individuals to maintain and cherish India's democracy and secularism, and to ensure a safe and peaceful society for the betterment of all. Now let us zoom in and look at the 11 fundamental duties. Let us see the artistic work of my ex-student Shiv, and using the help of his painting out here, we will look at the different kinds of duties. Now out here, you don't have to remember all the 11 in order, so don't worry about it. Let's start. The first duty is to follow the Indian Constitution or abide the Constitution, respect the ideals, institutions, national flag, national anthem, follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom, uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of our country, defend the country and render, that is, give national service when called upon to do so, promote harmony, spirit of brotherhood amongst the people, going beyond any kind of religious, linguistic or regional lines, value and preserve the rich heritage of our culture, protect and improve the natural environment, develop scientific temper, humanism, spirit of inquiry and reform, safeguard public property, and push aside or keep away from any kind of violence, strive towards excellence in all spheres, individually, collectively, to constantly take the country to higher levels. It is the duty, this is the last duty that was added, as I said, by the 86th Amendment Act. So what is that duty that was added? It is the duty of a parent or a guardian to provide opportunities for education to his child between the age of 6 to 14 years. Now these are the different fundamental duties that are given in our constitution. Now what is the importance of fundamental duties, or what is the significance of having fundamental duties? Fundamental duties make the citizens aware of their socio-economic obligations. It warns the people to do, not to do certain things for the interest of the country. It puts a check on unruly elements in the society. It protects the cultural heritage. It creates awakening awareness about our rich, varied culture. It strengthens national harmony and it stirs up a lot of patriotism, and therefore having duties is very, very important. And therefore it was added through which amendment? 42nd Amendment Act, and it was inserted in which part of the Constitution? Part 4 of the Constitution. Now let us move on to the last element, and that is directive principles of state policy. Just like every citizen has certain duties to perform towards the country, even the ruling government has certain duties towards its subjects or towards the citizens. Now, all these duties that the government has to perform are put in what we call as the directive principles of the state policy. Now what are directives? It is giving some kind of direction, as the word itself suggests. So these directive principles are the guidelines to be followed by the government for the smooth functioning of the country. Now they are not found in any other constitution of the world except that of India and Ireland. Now, like the fundamental rights, we heard that it is justiciable. So let's take a quick recap. What does justiciable mean? That means you can drag a person to the court if the fundamental rights are violated. Now, unfortunately, the directive principles are not justiciable means if the ruling party does not perform its duties, you cannot drag it to court. Yeah, but if the directive principles are not justiciable, then what is the need for having directive principles? What is the significance of the directive principles? Now, directive principles provide a framework for political, socio-economic programs that the government has to frame. Very important, it acts like a yardstick in the hands of the electorate. Now, who are the electorates? As we've already seen, people with voting rights. So, if you know that the government has to do so many things in so many areas, whether it's economics, whether it's social areas, and the government is not performing its duties, then it is a yardstick to check the performance of the government. Obviously, if at all the government is not performing properly, then either we will see that the vote of no confidence is passed, or when they stand up for elections next time, people will not vote for such a political party. But why are directive principles given? So that the government cannot say we were not aware, all this has to be done, these were the criteria on which we had to work, otherwise we would have worked better. So governments come, governments change, but these directives, these guidelines are there irrespective of the political party to take the country towards a welfare-oriented state. So they enlighten, educate people as to what they should expect from their politicians because they have brought them to power. Okay? So the directive principles give guidelines to the government to make laws, draft their policies. As I said, it takes our country towards the goal of a welfare-oriented state. Yeah? And the public is aware about it, but out here, when we are keeping on using the word welfare, I hope that you understand the meaning of the word welfare. Now, what is a welfare state? A welfare state is a state which tries to seek maximum happiness of maximum number of people living within its territories. Now, when you are trying to be a welfare state, when can a welfare state be possible? Only when the directive principles are being applied, are being implemented, or when the directive principles are put in action, when the government is performing its duties, only then will we turn into a welfare state. So it is the state with directive principles that are there. The directive principles emphasize the goal of Indian polity, which is a welfare state. What is a welfare state? It is a state which has positive duty to ensure that there is social justice, economic justice, dignity given to the individuals. So out here, our planning process has to be based on the directive principles so that there is a welfare state that is created where there is maximum happiness of maximum number of people. Now that we've got a rough idea about the directive principles, now the directive principles are put in part 4 of the Constitution. Now, in your textbook, they have bifurcated the chapter in a slightly different manner. What I felt is taking the duties of the citizens and taking the duties of the country, the government together, and club it and go ahead. So this is in part 4 of our Constitution. We saw fundamental rights are in part 3 of the Constitution. Like that, let us pick out points and let us look at a quick differentiation between fundamental rights and directive principles. So let's move on. Now, we've already seen this. Fundamental rights are provided in which part of the Constitution? Part 3. Directive principles are in which part? Part 4. We've seen this too, that fundamental rights are justiciable. That means you can take the person to the court if your rights have been violated. Now, directives are just obligations. You expect the government to do it. But if the duties are not performed, they cannot be taken to court. Okay. Now, the next thing is that the fundamental rights are the privileges for the citizens to enjoy. And here they are meant for the government to create those privileges for the citizens. Out here, fundamental rights, they are a kind of restriction on the state. That is, the state cannot do this, cannot do that. Yeah? So that the fundamental rights are upheld. And directive principles, they are giving directions to the state. Do this, do that, so that the fundamental rights of the people can be enjoyed. Now, the fundamental rights aim to establish political democracy, and directive principles aim to establish a welfare-oriented state. If we see fundamental rights, the scope is slightly limited as they are connected with individual rights, and directive principles, the scope is wider as they deal with a wide range of subjects including international peace and security. So in case there is a conflict between directive principles and fundamental rights, then the directive principles shall prevail. Why? Because the welfare of people as a whole is more important than that of an individual. Now that we've looked at the difference between the fundamental rights and the directive principles, let us move on and zoom in on certain more aspects of the directive principles. How do directive principles complement the fundamental rights? Now, the directive principles are fundamental to the governance of the country. It links the ideas with reality. People can enjoy the rights to the fullest only when there is equality, justice, liberty, and the directive principles aim at ensuring this equality, justice. The existence of fundamental rights is because of the implementation of the directive principles and the birth of a welfare-oriented state. The directive principles help the state to plan, formulate, introduce welfare programs in order to protect the rights of the people. Finally, we can say that the fundamental rights are the privileges for the citizen to enjoy, and the directive principles help the government in creating those privileges for the citizens to enjoy. Now, the scope of the syllabus just mentions that you need to know the meaning of directive principles and you need to know the meaning of a welfare state. But if you do not know the basic classification of directive principles, and if you do not know 2-3 examples of the directive principles being implemented, the chapter will remain incomplete. Why? Because as I said, only when the directive principles are implemented can you sit and explain what is a welfare-oriented state. So what we are going to do is very quickly have a look at the classification of the directive principles. Now, different textbooks, different websites have different ways in which they have clubbed up points. I am going to go in for this classification which takes the directive principles onto 5 different levels. That means the rules for governance, the guidelines for governance are categorized into 5 elements. So we'll just hear those categories and then I will help you how to remember the classification. So the first thing is economic principles, Gandhian principles, protection of monument and environment, law, justice and administration, and finally international peace and security. Now how will you remember that? Take a look at this old 50 rupee note. So you have money here, economic principle, then can you see the picture of Gandhiji out here? Gandhian principles. Then when you turn the note, can you see there is the parliament structure? So we'll take that as a monument right now. And can you see the floral motifs and the flower and the other patterns and the leaves? Okay. So monument and environment. So the next principle is protection of monuments and environment. Then you have the parliament structure that makes the laws which are just, and it helps in carrying out smooth administration of the country. So law, justice, administration, and finally when you hold the 50 rupee note in the light, you can see that security line running through RBI India. Alright, so that keeps our mind at peace that it is not a counterfeit note. So out here you have your directive principles and the classification out here. Now let us see how these directive principles are being implemented. So whenever we are learning something, it is not just something of the past, we also have to see the relevance of it in today's time. So let's move on. In this picture out here, you will be able to see there's something called as Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals to transform our world. And if you have a look at the logo out here, I'm sure you will be able to identify it, taking a quick recap, that it belongs to the United Nations organization. Now, what are these 17 developmental goals out here? What is happening? Why have I put it in the middle of directive principles of state policy of India? Now, all the member nations of the UN met in 2015 and adopted the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Now, all these sustainable development goals provide for all the countries of the world a roadmap for development till the year 2030. Now, these 17 goals aim to transform the world. India has adopted these goals and has been integrating these goals through the directive principles of state policy, and that is why I have introduced this picture out here. Now, the government of India established something called as NITI, Niti Aayog, that is National Institute for Transforming India, a policy think tank with the aims of achieving the sustainable development goals. So what we will do is we will see examples of the government putting the directive principles into action, and when we look at those examples, we will see which sustainable development goal, in short form SDG, which sustainable development goal is it also trying to achieve at that international level. So let's move on. Under the economic principles, what is the government expected to do? Provide adequate means of livelihood, equal pay for equal work, public assistance, healthcare centers, hospitals, old age homes. Let us see what the government has done. It has amended the Minimum Wages Act of 1948 to see that there is just payment given to the workers, equal pay for equal work. Then there is something called as PM's Kaushalya Vikas Yojana that encourages youth for the development of skills by giving them monetary rewards. Now this is in sync with SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. The government has abolished the zamindari system, has introduced a number of land reform programs. It has started the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana that gives an insurance cover against the failure of crops. SDG goal number 2 speaks about zero hunger. Next, it has passed the Jana Dhana Yojana, which calls for bank accounts being open for the poor. SDG goal number 8, decent work and economic growth, is shown out here. Then if we look at SDG 1, no poverty, what has our Indian government done? The Indira Gandhi Old Age Pension Scheme has been issued. Then the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, which provides funds for the empowerment of women. Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, where the government transfers 6,000 rupees per year in 3 installments in the accounts of the farmers. PM Cares Fund, providing assistance and relief in the COVID-19 situation. So out here, these are the different schemes. Even the National Food Security Act, which gives the right to subsidize food grains, adequate quantity and quality of food at affordable prices, which targets SDG goal number 2 of zero hunger. What is the government expected to do under the Gandhian principles? It is expected to promote cottage industry, strengthen the village structure, provide education. So the government has passed a number of schemes like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, Bharat Padhe online campaign during the current lockdown scenario, providing a digital platform for learning. It has provided a number of special scholarships to the socio-economically weaker sections of the society. Untouchability has been made an offense. Gramoday se Bharat Udav, which looks into the development of villages for the development of the country. It targets SDG goal number 1, no poverty. What is the government expected to do? Under this directive, it is expected to protect the monuments from destruction, disposal, export, protect wildlife and forests. So what has the government done? It has carried out Namami Ganje, aiming at conservation and cleanliness of River Ganga. This is in sync with SDG 6, clean water and sanitization. Then it has carried out a national plan to conserve the marine ecosystem, to conserve the aquatic life in sync with SDG 14, life underwater. It has carried out many projects like Project Tiger, Project Elephant to conserve the majestic species of animals. This is in sync with SDG 15, life on land. With respect to law, justice, administration, it is to look into political, administrative and legal matters. Panchayati Raj has been established in the remotest villages to promote the idea of local self-government. Free legal aid has been provided to those people who cannot afford lawyers. So there has been work done to ensure equal justice to all. Sustainable Developmental Goal number 16 calls for justice and peace. So the government of India has adopted the Pragati platform, public grievance redressal system, the Gram Nyayalays for villages. It also calls for separation of the judiciary from the executive branch. And finally, if we look at international peace and security, it speaks about the foreign policy, it is a duty of the nation to maintain good international relations with other countries. So what has it done? In order to promote international peace and security, India has opposed colonialism, racialism, and has helped many countries win their freedom. It respects international law. India holds the policy of complete disarmament. And it has stood for the settlement of international issues through mutual understanding. So all these are the different examples showing us that yes, the government is trying to achieve the status of a welfare-oriented state, is working hard to seek and ensure the maximum happiness of maximum number of people living within the territory. So with this, we close the chapter Salient Features of our Indian Constitution. Thank you. Bye.